Hi, this is Madison with Health by Ratio, and in this video, we're going to talk about how to avoid and prevent injuries around cycling and bike riding. Health by Ratio is an online group of licensed practitioners from physical therapists, orthopedic movement specialists, and corrective exercise coaches that work with our clients and take a holistic approach to resolve lingering pains and injuries and move back towards the active lives that they love to live. All right, so getting into our main topic about how to prevent injuries around cycling and bike riding, or spin classes for that matter, I want to cover a couple of things here. So, first and foremost, I want to talk about the most common injuries and why they occur. And then we're going to talk about cues to be mindful of, as well as techniques to do to help mitigate these injuries in the future. So, first and foremost, with regards to cycling, bike riding, spinning, it's a great form of low impact cardiovascular exercise that can also be really fun for a variety of different reasons. But many of us have some challenges around this activity in regards to one or both knees, potentially the lower back slash SI joint, and another compromised area can be the neck and shoulders. Now, all of these are prevalent because of certain deviations that can occur around this. And there's potentially a little bit of overuse that can occur as well. So we're going to talk about both those. In terms of the misalignments or asymmetries that impact us, with regards to the knees, the most common thing that irritates the knee is often the tendency for us, instead of pedaling straight forward and straight backward with our foot, knee, and hip, we often have the knee tracking differently between the foot and the hip. So we might have, for instance, the foot turning out a little bit and the knee on its push down going inside, like my kneecap, if we drew a straight line, it's going inside of my big toe as I'm pressing down. The knee actually might literally be angled inward while we're doing it. Well, that's called knee valgus. It puts a lot of tension and torque on things like the meniscus, the patellar tendon, the ACL, the MCL. All those kinds of things are getting pulled on and irritated, sheared a little bit when we pedal that way. Another common thing is we have an excessive external rotation at the hip, and the knee is really shooting laterally as we're pedaling. So the knee's going a little bit too much to the outside. Again, that can put attention on similar areas, but also the IT band and lateral aspects of the knee, the LCL, for instance, as well. So those areas of the knee getting irritated stem from the knee not being in alignment with its toes and not being in alignment with its hip. So we'll go into cues on how to kind of mitigate this, but also talk about how to resolve, because this is normally a natural tendency that's occurring due to imbalances in ranges of motion at the ankles and or the hips that are causing the knee to do what it's doing. So we'll talk about that in a second. The other next area are issues around the hips and the lower back. So this could be the actual hip itself, like the labrum, for instance, or outside lateral hip areas like irritation to the IT band around the attachment point up here. Can be maybe some TFL issues up in the outside position of the hip. And again, that's actually due to the same things that are occurring from the irritating the knee can irritate the hip. When my foot is turning out, my knee is collapsing in when I'm going into this valgus position, that pinches the inner tissues of the hip. When my knee is going out here, that's putting in more torque on the lateral aspects of the hip. So very similar root causes to what's happening to either of these joints. Now, in terms of the back or the SI joint, where the little nodes on either side of the lower back here, those occur more from unstable gluten core complexes when we're pedaling. And often we'll tend to deal with this on more one side versus the other. Like the right side of the back will be irritated, or the left side of the back will be irritated. And that's due where we might have one leg doing exactly what it's supposed to do, like it's pedaling exactly in alignment, while the other leg is doing something different. And that asymmetry causes the pelvis to rotate as we are pumping to one side. So we might have this instability that's rotating the entire lower back. And if we're in bad position with more of a rounded spine while we're over rotating, and then doing it at the shoulders. It would really be more prevalent at the hips. I just have my seat is a little bit too broad. It's preventing me from being able to really, there we go, drop the hip. That's what I'm looking to do. So by the unevenness of rotating the hips while I'm in that kind of lumbar rounded position puts a lot of torque on the lower back as well as the SI joint, and I'm not getting very good activation at the core there to stabilize and support the hips and the back in that position. And again, we're going to go over some cues to be mindful of, as well as where some of the root causes of that dysfunctional core can be coming from. And then with regards to the neck and the shoulders, it kind of stems to that same postural deviation. If I'm rounded like this and I'm rolling the shoulders forward and I'm craning my neck up, that puts all kinds of tension up on my neck. It also tightens up my shoulder girdle, rolling them forward. And if I don't do anything to undo that, because to a certain extent, biking is that position. Like we obviously can kind of position maybe the seat and handlebars a little bit differently to give us a little bit more elongation as we're riding, but we're still going to be having either our hands or our arms forward to prop us up. So we are going to naturally have some tension there, and we're going to need to look up a little bit. So we are going to have some tension on the neck. We can mitigate that again with some cues, but it's going to be more in with regards to what we do in between or as our warm up and cool down of our bike riding or cycling session that is going to help us resolve the lasting, like lingering injuries to the neck and shoulder girdle itself. So that's where I want to transition to next. Okay, now for the cues that we want to be mindful of while we are bike riding or cycling. And if we implement these cues correctly, again, we're going to kind of minimize the effects, the aggravation to the knees, the hips, the back, the shoulders, the neck. And it's going to make us a more efficient rider because we're going to be using our leg musculatures symmetrically, and we're going to be stabilizing ourselves through the core symmetrically, which is going to allow us to get more drive into each pedal. So we'll be that much more efficient with the activity that we love to do. So the cues that we want to be mindful of with the pedal, with the foot itself, what we want to be trying to do, we want to straighten out the foot. We don't want to let that foot turn out to the side. This is a common thing that many people do. We want to keep that ankle as straight as possible. If we can't do that, that often means that we have some tensions around the ankle preventing us from doing this. And that might be something that we want to assess and see what is irritating us. Is it specific or tightened on us? Is it the calf? Is it the soleus? Is it the plantar fascia line? Is it the perineal on the outside? And is it a combination of tissues that we need to mobilize and free up to help this ankle? That's something that my team and I would be happy to help with. We do this for free with our video assessments as we assess how someone moves and why they move with testing out ranges of motion and really determining what their whole body is doing, in part the ankles. So anyway, we'll talk more about that in a sec. But the cue that we want to do is get the foot straight, and with our pressing into the pedal, we want to evenly press between the first and fifth metatarsal of the ball of the foot. So we want to press evenly across this. A lot of times we'll get into the habit of just pressing to one of the edges of the feet. So we'll feel like I'm pushing more towards my pinky toe, or I'm pushing really hard in towards my big toe. And that overemphasis to one side or the other is what can dictate what direction the knee is going, which also dictates which direction the hip is going. So first and foremost is press evenly through the pad of the foot and try to keep the foot as straight as possible. The next cue is we want to have the knee drive coming straight up with each pedal. We want to be able to have this leg coming here with each pedal and not coming inside or not coming outside. So every once in a while, just taking a quick glance down at your knee and seeing, is it in alignment with my foot or is it going inside or outside? Now, if it's going inside or outside and the ankle is in alignment, then that could be a compensation that might be stemming from the hips in this scenario. So we might have an overactive adductor or a weak hip flexor or an overactive TFL, IT band, or some combination of things that's pulling on the hips. And again, we would want to assess this to see what do we need to mobilize in between our cycling, biking sessions that will help this tissue open up and keep the leg in proper alignment. Now, for the upper body, whether it's the SI joint, the where it's attaching to the sacrum, the lower back itself, the shoulder girdle, the cues that we want to be mindful of is one, the positioning of our body. We want to be able to have ourselves not in this kind of hunched over position, which I'm over exaggerating, but we want to have a little bit more space where we can elongate the body here. But then the other really important cue, as long as we're implementing even pedaling. So again, we want to be focusing on that proper pressing into both pedals with the knees going straight. As long as we're not doing that asymmetrically, that's going to keep the torso centered. We're not going to have one side dipping to over and over while the other one's hiked up. In this case, I'm going to be even, but I want to wake up my core. And to do that, I'm going to help with stabilizing my shoulder girdle, which is also going to support my neck. The best way of doing this is with my hands on my handlebars. I'm going to do what's called screwing my hands into the ground. So I'm going to screw my hands into the handlebars, which allows me to get some external rotation at my shoulders and kind of pinch my shoulders back into neutral. So I'm not protracted here. I'm in more of a neutral shoulder position. I can feel a little bit more activation in these back muscles, which support that neck and which turn on the core stabilizers here to keep my hips that much more stable. So again, I'm not going to be dropping a hip to either side. These are going to stay in place. Core is going to stay stable. Shoulders and neck are in alignment. And so each pedal is going to be that much more productive, but it's also going to keep my joints in alignment and supported so they don't get irritated to one side or the other. Now, I want to transition into what we can do in between our cycling sessions to help us feel better and mitigate the tensions that are cultivated from this great activity. Now, in terms of the general techniques that we need to implement to help us mitigate the overuse of the position that we can be in while cycling, because even if we maintain that proper alignment that we talked about with the cues in the last section of the video, the body is still in a flexed position and we are going in and out of a limited range of motion at the hips with, again, the shoulders and neck still in a position that's tightening us up. And if we think about how much of our daily lives we might also be contributing to tensions in these areas, like time in front of our computers or using our smart devices, driving, eating, watching some TV at the end of the day, all of these different activities involve us tightening up the hip flexors and often tightening up around the anterior shoulder girdle. And that pulls the head forward and can end up putting more tension in the back of the neck. So as awesome as cycling and bike riding can be, if we have issues with these areas of the body already being tight, then it's going to make things even worse for us. So we got to do some stuff in between our bike riding sessions, whether that's warm-ups, cool downs, or on our off days with some cross training to help mitigate this. Does it have to take forever? No. For the cyclists and triathletes that we work with, or just the mountain bike enthusiasts that we work with, the name of the game is spending about 10 to 15 minutes a day, whether that's 5 to 10 minutes as a warm-up and 5 minutes as a cool down before and after the session, or on their off days, spending 10 to 15 minutes doing some corrective exercise work to help the body move with better balance and harmony here. So the general things that we want to think about in terms of the mobility of the body, we want to undo the tensions that we experience at the hips themselves. So this is going to be opening up the hip flexors, like doing things like a kneeling hip flexor stretch to open this guy up, or a couch stretch to open up the quads and the hip flexors in this position. It can be doing things with a trigger point ball or a foam roller to release into the hip flexors and the TFL and the quads and actually get some soft tissue mobilization, which I find it with when we compare the mobility, manual mobility techniques with some dynamic stretching, then we're cooking with fire. Then we're really able to improve the elasticity of our tissues here. The other areas that we want to consider would be the chest and the shoulders themselves. So opening up the chest in various angles of like a door frame stretch, or utilizing something like a resistance band and going into a stretch, and we can move the arms in different positions and pull these guys open. We can also, again, use mobility techniques, manual manipulation to the chest and front of shoulders to actually massage into these areas. Foam roller probably is not such a great for this region of the body. So normally a ball, like this is a lacrosse ball, a tennis ball, a baseball, something like that, can be great for these areas to open up and massage into these tissues and get them more pliable again. That helps us on the mobility side of things. Also working on the back of the neck, the occipital region, so base of the skull, working into the back of the neck. I find actually doing this with our own hands and massaging into these tissues is the most effective way to get into this region, and is a great thing to do on a regular basis. Don't have to do this every single day, but doing these manual manipulations and stretches can go a long way in helping us undo some of these postural positions that we're in throughout our day, but also around biking and cycling. So the other thing that we want to do, though, is we want to do some cross training. Does this have to be like full-blown hour-long workouts? It certainly can be, and that can be great, but not all of us love doing strength training. Our passion is biking or triathlons or mountain biking or whatever. So if that's the case, compromise. Give your body a little bit of it on a regular basis instead of spending an hour plus on it. And the areas that we really want to focus on are going to be the glutes, which are going to pair with the hamstrings. And we're going to want to work on the big back, mid-back muscles and the core stabilizers. So exercises like lunges and squats and deadlifts are phenomenal for the glutes and getting into hip extension. Now, we want to make sure that we're doing full range of motion here. With many of the triathletes and many of the cyclists that my team and I work with, we find that they've gotten into the habits of doing partial range of motion. They'll do a squat and come up to like right here and then go right back into the squat. So they're never actually extending into a neutral hip position. Same thing with a lunge. They'll go into a lunge and then they'll come up to like part way and then back into the lunge and part way. We want to make sure that we're going into that full hip extension. Deadlift, we want to come all the way up to the deadlift to fully wake up those glutes and get in better ranges of motion here. Exercises for the core are going to be core stabilizers, waking up. So things like chops and anti-rotation / they're also referred to as pal-off presses. Planks can be okay. I would say in terms of those of us that are cycling a lot and we're already on our shoulder, pressing into our shoulders and arms quite a bit, like to me, doing some type of chop or some type of anti-rotation with a band pulling us or a cable machine pulling us off to the side and we're fighting that rotation, those are much more effective and they don't tax the shoulders as a component of the exercise like we might experience from a plank. Things like crunches, that doesn't necessarily, this crunches and sit-ups are causing us to do this. We're already in that position enough as is. We don't need more of that kind of activation for those of us that like to cycle and bike ride. Leg lifts and butterfly kicks, that kind of stuff, those guys are getting us into more hip flexion type work. So we're already in that position enough when we're cycling and we're sitting on our bike. So that's not necessarily going to counterbalance these positions that we're in too much. So more of our chopping and pal-off pressing for the core is much more functional. And then upper body wise, we want to just do anything that we can think of pulling wise. A row in different angles, reverse flies to work on the back, pull downs or pull ups in different positions, those kinds of exercises, and really pulling those shoulders back to neutral with each of our movements. That's going to be what strengthens up these really important big back muscles that help support the neck and work our way down to wake up the core stabilizers, which therefore help the hips and all the way down. So those are the kind of techniques you want to do in general. Now, I will say, if you're dealing with single-sided injuries, meaning one knee or one hip or one side of the back or more one side of the neck and shoulder are giving you problems, not that these recommendations are inappropriate, but there's probably some other nitty-gritty things happening in your body where you're having asymmetries at the hips or the ankles or up at the shoulders that are pulling the body off to one side or the other. And when that's the case, we want to get a better balance where we're not working everything evenly. We technically want to work the tighter tissues on the right side or the left side more than the looser tissues on the opposite. And often it's a combination of things on the right and left. Like I might have issues with my right knee, but that could be stemming from things happening in my right ankle and things that are happening in my left hip, which are impacting and some stuff that's happening from my right shoulder. Like there can be a zigzag that's going that even the non-pain side is part of the culprit in this. When that's the case, this is where having a professional to take a look at how and why your body is moving from head to toe, a full body holistic approach to look at your biomechanics, can save you so much like pain, literally. Like it can save you in terms of the root causes of what's actually impacting these joints. That's what my team and I are here for. We will connect with anybody and everybody over 2 free calls. The first call is a quick call to just understand what you're dealing with, what your goals are, what you've already tried, and see, and just to get information about what you've been dealing with. The second call, though, is much more extensive. It's a video assessment to actually see how and why your body is moving the way it does from head to toe and break down for you where your root causes, where your imbalances, where your low-hanging fruits are stemming from, so that you have a very specific game plan on what needs to be mobilized versus what needs to be strengthened between the left and the right-hand sides of the body and from head to toe. If you guys are interested in that, my team and I would love to help you. Feel free to click below. You'll see a link to our calendar where you can, or actually that's below if you're watching this on YouTube, above if you're watching this on Facebook. But feel free to click the link above or below, and you'll be able to get access to our calendar where you can pick a time and day that works best for you, and we'll be happy to help. Talk soon.